I came back to my grandfather's lake cabin on a rainy Thursday afternoon and found a stranger grilling burgers on the front porch like he paid the mortgage there himself. Meanwhile, my grandfather's war medals were sitting in soaked cardboard boxes by the trash cans, and some girl with neon green nails looked me dead in the eye and said, "You should have answered your mail sooner, honey." I honestly thought I was hallucinating for a second because this place had been in my family since Eisenhower was president, and somehow, according to the woman running our HOA, it now belonged to her unemployed son. Now if you've ever inherited property in a small lake town, you already know people start acting weird the second an old owner dies. Folks who never waved at you before suddenly wanna help you understand permits and zoning and local regulations. Translation, they're trying to figure out how much they can take before you notice. But what happened to me wasn't just greed. It was personal. Deeply personal. My grandfather, Leonard Mercer, built that cabin himself in 1958 after coming home from Korea. He bought 6 acres on Blackwater Lake for $900 and spent 3 summers cutting cedar logs by hand because, according to him, banks own enough men already. That was the kind of guy he was. Tough, quiet, suspicious of authority in a way only old war veterans can be. He trusted dogs more than politicians and coffee more than medicine. When I was a kid, summers at that cabin felt like another universe. You'd wake up to fog floating over the lake, hear loons crying in the distance, smell bacon grease and pine sap drifting through the screen windows. My grandfather would sit on the dock sharpening fishing hooks like he was preparing for battle. He barely talked sometimes, but when he did, every sentence sounded earned. So when he passed, leaving the cabin to me, I promised myself I'd keep it exactly the way he left it. Same handmade table. Same crooked dock. Same old radio in the kitchen that only picked up 2 stations if the weather behaved itself. And for about a year, everything was fine. Then came Evelyn Voss. Now listen, every town has one person who somehow inserts themselves into everybody else's business. Evelyn was ours. Mid-60s, platinum blonde hair that never moved in the wind, smile sharp enough to skin a deer. She ran the Blackwater Cove HOA like a dictator wearing perfume. Her son Tyler was 28 years old, unemployed, permanently sunburned, and had the emotional maturity of a gas station lighter. If trouble needed a roommate, Tyler volunteered. Everybody knew he dealt pills out of his pickup truck behind the marina, but somehow he always slipped out of consequences like grease off a paper plate. The first letter from Evelyn showed up while I was helping my mom recover from surgery in Indiana. Certified mail. Big red stamp. Real dramatic. According to the HOA, my property owed $18,000 in retroactive shoreline stabilization assessments. I remember laughing out loud in my mom's kitchen because the wording sounded so ridiculous. Shoreline stabilization? Leonard Mercer built that seawall himself 40 years before the HOA even existed. I called Evelyn immediately. She answered on the second ring like she'd been waiting beside the phone. "Well," she said, sweet as poison, "nice of you to finally call back." I told her there had to be a mistake. She gave this little chuckle, the kind rich people do when they already know the game is rigged in their favor. "No mistake, sweetheart. Your grandfather agreed to all future assessments back in the 80s. My grandfather hated HOAs. She said, dead people can't clarify paperwork, can they? That line sat in my chest like a rock. From there, things escalated fast. Every week brought another violation. Grass too high. Dock lights too dim. Improper mailbox color. Unauthorized flag placement. One citation claimed my firewood stack created psychological clutter visible from neighboring lots, and I swear to God I wish I were making that up. Neighbors stopped talking to me. Folks who used to wave suddenly stared at the ground. I later found out Evelyn had been going door to door telling people I was unstable, angry veteran type, dangerous when drinking. Thing is, I'm not even a veteran. But once gossip gets moving in a small town, facts become optional. Then one morning I came back from buying bait and found a foreclosure notice nailed to my front door. Not tucked politely in the mailbox. Nailed. Like some medieval warning. I remember standing there in the drizzle staring at that paper while the lake water slapped softly against the dock behind me, and for the first time since my grandfather died, I felt genuinely afraid. Not for the property. For the memory of him. Because suddenly I realized this woman wasn't trying to collect fees. She was trying to erase us completely. And the worst part? I still had no idea why. About 3 weeks after that foreclosure notice showed up, I learned something important about people like Evelyn Voss. They only smile when they think they've already won. I drove back to Blackwater Cove after spending 2 days meeting with a lawyer in Madison, and the second I turned onto Mercer Road, I knew something was wrong. There were tire tracks all over the gravel driveway, fresh cigarette butts near the porch steps, and somebody had spray painted a giant orange X across my grandfather's old tool shed like the place was about to be demolished. I stood there in complete silence for maybe 30 seconds, just listening to rain drip off the trees. Then Tyler came out of the cabin wearing my grandfather's flannel jacket. Not one that looked similar. The actual jacket. The green wool one with the burn mark near the elbow from 1979 when Grandpa fell asleep too close to the wood stove during a snowstorm. Tyler walked out carrying a beer and grinned like we were old friends. "You can't be here," I said. He took a sip. "Funny. Mom says you can't." Then his girlfriend came outside behind him, chewing gum loud enough to hear across the porch. "You got 30 seconds before I call the sheriff," she said. I remember looking past them into the cabin and feeling physically sick. My grandfather's handmade furniture was gone. The old fishing rods weren't hanging by the fireplace anymore. Even the photographs had disappeared from the walls. In their place were cheap LED lights, beer cans, a giant flat-screen TV sitting crooked on top of the antique cedar cabinet my grandfather built with hand tools. It felt like somebody had dug up a grave and turned it into an Airbnb. I called the sheriff immediately. Big mistake. Deputy Collins arrived 20 minutes later, took one glance at Tyler holding paperwork Evelyn had apparently prepared ahead of time, then pulled me aside like I was the inconvenience. "Look," he sighed, "according to county records, ownership transferred last week after a sheriff's auction." A fake auction. That's for civil court to decide. That's my family's property. Not anymore. I swear, hearing that while standing 10 feet from the dock where my grandfather taught me how to fish nearly broke something inside me. Tyler leaned against the porch rail smirking the entire time. Then he yelled, "Hey deputy, ask him if he wants his junk boxes back." That's when I noticed them. 8 cardboard boxes sitting beside the trash barrels near the road, soaked through from rain. My grandfather's Purple Heart medal was lying half buried in mud beside a busted tackle box. Something inside me went cold. Not rage exactly. Colder than that. The kind of calm where your body decides anger isn't enough anymore. Deputy Collins must have seen it on my face because he stepped between us fast. Go home, Ethan. Home. That word almost made me laugh. Because home was standing right there behind him. And some parasite was grilling burgers on the porch. That night I stayed at Murphy's Lodge about 10 miles outside town. Tiny place. Smelled like old carpet and cigarette smoke no matter how many pine-scent air fresheners they hung near the office. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing Tyler wearing my grandfather's jacket. Around 2 in the morning, I started going through the foreclosure paperwork again. That's when I noticed something strange. The HOA agreement Evelyn submitted supposedly had my grandfather's signature from 1984. But the address listed on the form used a zip code Blackwater Cove didn't even adopt until 1991. Now maybe that sounds minor, but when you spend enough time around old paperwork, little details start screaming at you. The next morning I drove straight to town records. The county clerk, a tired man named Walter Green who looked permanently 2 days from retirement, quietly closed his office door after I showed him the documents. "You didn't get this from me," he muttered. Then he pulled up property transfer records dating back 40 years. That's when the whole thing started unraveling. Evelyn's family had somehow acquired 3 lakefront properties over the last decade through suspicious HOA foreclosures. Every single one involved elderly owners, inherited land, or people living out of state. Every single one sold for laughably low amounts, and every property eventually ended up connected to somebody in Evelyn's orbit. Her cousin. Her brother-in-law. A shell LLC tied to Tyler. It wasn't random. It was a business model. And suddenly I understood why she wanted my grandfather's cabin so badly. It wasn't about rules. It was about lakefront land. Prime lakefront land. That cabin sat on one of the deepest shoreline stretches in the county, and developers had been circling Blackwater Lake for years trying to build luxury homes for Chicago money. Evelyn didn't want compliance. She wanted ownership. The moment that realization hit me, everything changed. I stopped thinking like a victim. Started thinking like my grandfather. See, Leonard Mercer had this old saying, if somebody corners you quietly, it means they're afraid of a loud fight. So I got loud. I hired Rebecca Navarro, an attorney from Milwaukee who specialized in HOA fraud litigation. Rebecca was terrifying in the best possible way. 5'3", Cuban American, sharp suits, sharper mouth. The kind of woman who could say, "Good morning," and make grown men feel legally threatened. She reviewed my documents for maybe 20 minutes before looking up and saying, "Oh, Evelyn's dirty." That was the first good thing anybody had said to me in weeks. Rebecca immediately filed an emergency injunction challenging the foreclosure process. According to state law, the HOA had skipped multiple mandatory hearings before placing liens on the property. Basically, Evelyn moved too fast because she thought I wouldn't fight back. But then something happened neither Rebecca nor I expected. 3 days later, I got served with a restraining order. Evelyn claimed I'd been stalking her. According to her statement, I'd driven past her house repeatedly, threatened Tyler, and made violent military-style intimidation gestures during our interactions. Again, I was never military. But facts didn't matter anymore. Fear did. The restraining order banned me from coming within 500 feet of the cabin until a court hearing could happen. 500 feet. From my own family home. Rebecca was furious. This woman's weaponizing the court system, she snapped. And honestly, she was good at it. That's what scared me most. Evelyn understood something a lot of bullies understand: you don't need truth if you can create exhaustion. And I was exhausted. Mentally. Emotionally. Financially. I started questioning myself at night. Wondering if maybe I should just walk away. Sell whatever legal rights remained and let the place go. Every fight felt expensive. Every conversation turned ugly. Even grocery shopping became uncomfortable because people stared. Then one evening, something happened that changed everything. I was sitting in Murphy's diner drinking burnt coffee when an elderly woman slid into the booth across from me without asking. Her name was Nora Chen. I recognized her immediately because 5 years earlier, she and her husband mysteriously lost their property after a zoning dispute with the HOA. She placed a thick envelope on the table. "You're not the first person Evelyn's done this to," she said quietly. Inside were photographs, legal notices, financial statements, years of documentation. And right there near the bottom was a blurry old photo from 1983 showing Evelyn's father standing beside my grandfather during some argument near the lake shoreline. Nora tapped the picture. "That feud never ended," she whispered. "Turns out Evelyn's father once tried to buy part of my grandfather's land dirt cheap after a bad storm damaged the dock. My grandfather refused, then later testified in a county dispute that cost the Voss family thousands in shoreline rights." According to Nora, Evelyn grew up hearing about Leonard Mercer like he was some kind of villain. 40 years later, she was finally getting revenge. Or at least she thought she was. Because buried underneath the papers Nora handed me was something else. A faded government envelope. Stamped confidential. Addressed to my grandfather. From the FBI. I stared at that FBI envelope for a long time before opening it, mostly because nothing about my grandfather made sense anymore. Leonard Mercer barely trusted parking meters, yet somehow there was federal correspondence sitting in front of me stamped confidential like something out of a Cold War movie. Nora watched me carefully while I slid the papers out. Inside were letters dating back decades. Payment vouchers. Meeting schedules. Official bureau letterhead. Most of it was heavily redacted, but one line kept repeating over and over: "Thank you for continued use of the property." The property. My grandfather's cabin. At first I honestly thought maybe he'd just rented the place to somebody connected to the government years ago, but then I found a signed letter from 1987 written by a special agent named Claire Holloway. And that letter changed everything. It stated clearly that the Mercer cabin maintained inactive federal easement protections connected to historical operational usage. I read that sentence 3 times. Then a fourth. Nora looked at me over her coffee cup and quietly said, "Ethan, I don't think your grandfather was just some old fisherman. That night I barely breathed, let alone slept. The next morning Rebecca nearly ripped the letter out of my hands when I showed her. Holy hell, she whispered. Turns out federal easements supersede local HOA authority entirely. Meaning if the easement was still active, Evelyn's foreclosure wasn't just unethical. It was illegal on a federal level. Rebecca immediately contacted the regional FBI office expecting to get ignored. Instead, 2 hours later, we got a call back. From Claire Holloway herself. Retired now. Late 70s. Voice calm and sharp at the same time. She remembered my grandfather instantly. Leonard Mercer saved lives, she said quietly over speakerphone. Your cabin was used during organized crime investigations throughout the 70s and 80s. Off-record meetings. Surveillance staging. Safe house coordination. I nearly dropped the phone. My grandfather, the quiet guy teaching me how to untangle fishing lines, had secretly worked with federal agents for decades. And Evelyn had unknowingly tried stealing federally protected property. When Rebecca explained the foreclosure situation, Claire went silent for several seconds. Then she said the most beautiful sentence I'd heard in months, "Don't let anybody leave town." Things moved fast after that. Faster than Evelyn could control. Within 48 hours, federal investigators started reviewing the foreclosure documents. The fake HOA agreement was sent for forensic analysis and collapsed almost immediately. Wrong ink age. Modern paper stock. Forged notary seal. Evelyn had literally manufactured evidence. Meanwhile Tyler kept acting untouchable. That arrogance ended because of one stupid mistake. My grandfather's cabin still had old exterior security cameras hidden near the dock and tool shed. I found the backup recording stored inside a rusted tackle locker beneath the workbench. And those cameras caught everything. Tyler selling pills from the back porch. Tyler bragging about finally owning the old man's place. Even Evelyn coaching witnesses before court hearings. At one point she actually said, "Just keep repeating he threatened you." Judges believe fear. Rebecca watched the footage once and just leaned back smiling slowly. Oh, she's cooked. The final collapse happened during a town council meeting Evelyn herself requested. That's the funny thing about narcissists, they always think the spotlight belongs to them right up until it burns them alive. The whole town packed into the community center that night. People lined the walls. Half the lake community showed up because gossip had spread everywhere by then. Evelyn entered like she was running for governor. Perfect suit. Perfect hair. Tyler beside her pretending not to sweat through his collar. Then she started talking. Claimed I'd fabricated federal documents. Claimed I was manipulating public sympathy. Claimed my grandfather had been a deeply disturbed anti-government radical. And honestly, that part hurt. Because Leonard Mercer spent his entire life helping people quietly without asking for recognition. Then halfway through Evelyn's speech, the back doors opened. 3 federal marshals walked in beside Claire Holloway. You could feel the air leave the room. Claire stepped forward calmly holding a folder. I'd like to clarify a few things, she said. Nobody moved. Nobody even coughed. She explained my grandfather's service history, not military heroics, but years of confidential civilian cooperation assisting federal investigations. She confirmed the cabin's easement protections remain legally intact, meaning Evelyn never had authority over the property in the first place. Then came the knockout punch. Claire held up the forged HOA document. This agreement was fabricated recently, she said flatly. Federal analysis confirms the materials used did not exist in 1984. Evelyn actually stumbled backward. Tyler muttered, "Mom," and then one of the marshals informed him he was under arrest for narcotics distribution tied to federal property violations. Right there in front of everybody. The room exploded. People shouting. Chairs scraping. Somebody in the back literally applauded. Evelyn started screaming about conspiracies and corruption while marshals placed her in handcuffs. The entire time she kept glaring at me like somehow this was still my fault. But the strangest part? I didn't feel victorious. Not immediately. Mostly I just felt tired. Deep, soul-level tired. Because revenge fantasies always end differently in your head. In reality, it's quieter. Sadder. You look around and realize everybody lost something. The HOA collapsed within months after multiple financial investigations uncovered fraud and embezzlement tied to Evelyn's family. Several foreclosures got overturned. Nora Chin eventually recovered partial rights to her old property. Rebecca became kind of a local legend. And me? I went back to the cabin. I repaired the dock. Hung my grandfather's photographs back where they belonged. Kept the old radio in the kitchen. Some nights I still sit on that porch listening to the lake and thinking about Leonard Mercer, wondering how many secrets that old man carried without ever saying a word. And honestly, sometimes I still wonder if Evelyn truly hated us. Or if she just spent 40 years inheriting somebody else's bitterness until it consumed her completely. So now I wanna ask you something. If somebody stole your family home through lies and corruption, and you finally had the power to destroy them publicly, would you? Or would you walk away before revenge changed you too? Let me know in the comments, because after everything that happened at Blackwater Lake, I'm still not completely sure what the right answer is.